Hi, and welcome back to the April Design Challenge series. If you haven't seen the first episode of this series, let me catch you up to speed. Essentially, each day I'm making a creation in the Geometry Dash editor based around a 5-color palette. These palettes are randomly generated and the creations are built entirely in one day. The goal of this challenge is to get the creative juices flowing and help me regain inspiration on my ongoing solo project. Anyway, I'm sure you get the general idea, so let's get right into today's design. I began by going to coolers.co where I generate my random palette. As you can see, I generated a combination of browns and greens. As soon as I saw this, my mind went to nature and forest. The browns just looked incredibly earthy, and the greens complemented this setting. So with my general idea of a theme already laid out, I needed to come up with a one-word definition of what I was going to build to help me get my head wrapped around the task. I also needed to come up with a concept for what I was even doing. At this point, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do a background or a block design or even both. This is why I began by conceptualizing on paper. This time I recorded myself doing so in the goal of helping you all see my process. I started by writing down my thought process. You can see me materializing my idea. At first I had the word earthy, then fall/summer, and then nature. However, I wanted a word that captured a specific vibe in my head to help me build from there. I came up with woodland. For some reason, this sparks an image of brown forest with sunbeams streaming through the canopy. This also carried the idea of comfort and seclusion and being isolated from the world in a dense and deep forest. Now I needed to design an idea. My first goal was to draw out a forest background with depth using the multiple shades of green. I felt that this could allow a lot of density in this woodland and would help carry out the vibe that I had envisioned. However, working with such few colors is difficult, and I had to design my concepts with this in mind. Although I knew I wanted a background, I quickly settled on creating a block design to match. The multiple tones of the brown would allow depth and shading, and I felt as though I could make it work. I wanted the design to feel like an extension of the ground with grass and dirt and flowers while still sticking to my modern style. So, I decided that I was going to make a block design with a brown base and a green grass top. I wanted to use triangles for the grass to match the modern style feel, as I didn't want this to become an art block design. Halfway through drawing this out, I thought of similarities between this and the opening part in Good Dreams by JF. However, my block design would be much more modern styled and have art elements. The only similarity is the triangular grass top. I added crumbling dirt to the sides along with a vine and some flowers, and I felt as though my idea was complete enough to begin. Now it was time for me to move into the editor. I started by making a large flat background with the lightest green. Then I began adding trees in the classic flat design style with the slightly darker green. This was forming the base of the background. After I filled up some of the space with these green trees, I added some foreground trees as well, which were much thinner and in the gold color. I added to this detailing with bushes. I decided to try and mix up the colors a little by making some of the foreground trees the darker brown color, which I think turned out nicely in the end. At the time, however, I was a bit unsure about this change. To finish up the basic version of the background, I made some leaves and scaled them to varying sizes, placing them around as if they were falling from the canopy. Next, I began to work on the block design itself. I started by adding the grassy triangular top part in the gold color. I built up the square block design base with the light brown underneath. Later I changed the shape and shading of this, but I always start with a plain blocky structure and build from there. I then began adding the dark outline around the block to help it stand out from the background and give it a modern feel. My next step was to add the shadows underneath the grass top. Originally, as you can see, this was done with the dark brown color used for the outline, because there wasn't really any other option. However, later, after I slightly cheat and use varying saturation and brightness values for my colors, I come back and change the way this looks. I then moved on to changing my structuring. I really wanted to make it look like the structure was crumbling away, eroding over time. To do this, I cut the left and right sides of the block and added a secondary base underneath. I'm always preaching the importance of adding depth, and so I felt as though this weathering was a good way to accomplish this. Here, you can see me first cheat by using various saturations and brightnesses of my colors. However, I'm still acting in the spirit of the challenge, so I don't really care. I think from now on, I'm going to officially allow this. However, the hue value will always remain untouched, obviously. Anyways, after I finished all of the base aspects of the scene, I moved on to greater detailing. I began this process by adding the flowers and vines to my block design. I placed some flowers on the tops of the block design to add variation in the flat, linear surfaces. I also tried placing some on the bushes, but I didn't really like the way they looked and removed them later. While I was working on the bushes, however, I added some of the leaves and additional depth with darker foreground plants. I made my way back to the block design eventually though and began working on the vines. I mainly had one large vine making its way across the block with the various flowers sprouting along the way. In retrospect, I wish I had added more vines, but this worked well enough. I added the shadow underneath the vine, and suddenly my block design was looking closer to completion. I added some of the bushes and trees on top of the design to help it blend into the environment better. I also added some crumbling rocks onto the ground itself to help improve the look of the scene. While I wasn't done with the block design yet, next I wanted to add more to the background. I decided to build up a canopy for the trees near the top of the frame with long vines hanging down. I thought this would make the forest feel more dense, which was my goal from the beginning, and almost like a little sanctum isolated from the rest of the world. This idea of comfort and isolation carried through to my next major change, one which, in my opinion, brought the design together. I decided to add light rays streaming through the canopy. I used the light green color and set the rays to blending on the highest layer. From here, I overlaid multiple of these light rays of varying sizes in various places, giving the whole scene a more serene feeling. Next, I made a few more adjustments to the background until I was finally happy. However, one thing I was not yet happy with was the block design. It still was far too empty. To fix this, I first made a few changes. I started by adding roots hanging down into the crumbling sections, making the whole design feel more earthy. The section itself was still very empty, so I added lines at a 45-degree angle. The purpose of these lines were to fill space and enhance the feeling of depth, which I believe they accomplished. Once I was done with this, I added some texturing to the base of the design with brown spots of varying sizes. Finally, my last step was to add the text for my name in the project. I had to Frankenstein together a 2 since I didn't have any numbers in my font, but in the end I made a nice looking 02-Woodland, which I overlaid into the top right corner alongside my name. Now, I'm going to shut up for a second and show the final result. Overall, I'm fairly happy with how it turned out. It's pretty simple, but for a one-day build, that makes sense. I still wish I had done more with the block design, but overall, nothing looks too bad and I could see it serving the function in a genuine level, which is always the most important thing in my mind. Anyway, that's about all I have for you today. In the meantime, I'll leave you with a hint about tomorrow's build. The one-word prompt I used was Firerose. Interpret that how you want. Well, until next time, see ya.